In the summer of 1931, in a quiet house in Florida, two infants were being raised side by side. They slept in matching cribs. They wore the same clothes. They were fed at the same table, bathed by the same hands, kissed goodnight by the same parents. They were, in every visible way, brother and sister, except they were not. One of them was a human baby, 10 months old. The other was a chimpanzee. And the two adults raising them were not simply parents. They were scientists. And their own son was the experiment. You already know how the story is supposed to go. Raise an ape like a human child, and perhaps it becomes a little bit human. That was the hypothesis. But over the 9 months that followed, something happened that the scientists had not planned for, could not stop, and would spend the rest of their lives trying not to talk about. The experiment did work, just in the opposite direction from the one they intended, and the price was paid by the one participant who never agreed to take part. This is the story of the ape and the child. It begins with a man named Winthrop Kellogg. By 1931, Kellogg was a comparative psychologist, a scientist who studied the minds of animals and humans side by side, and he was haunted by a particular question. He had spent years fascinated by so-called feral children, children who, through tragedy or abandonment, had grown up with little or no human contact, and who often never learned to speak or behave as humans do. These cases seemed to suggest something profound, that being human was not only in the blood, it was in the upbringing. Nature set the clay, nurture shaped it. Kellogg wanted to test that idea directly, and he understood, clearly, the experiment his question really demanded, and why he could never perform it. The clean version of the experiment was monstrous. To truly test how much of humanity comes from environment, you would take a human infant and raise it in the wild, among animals, and see what remained. Kellogg wrote plainly that such a thing would be ethically impossible. No scientist could take a child and strip away its human world, so he inverted it. If he could not bring a child into the world of an ape, he would bring an ape into the world of a child. He would take a baby chimpanzee and raise it, in every possible respect, exactly as a human infant. Same home, same clothing, same affection, same discipline, and measure how far toward humanity a chimpanzee could travel. There was just one thing the experiment needed: a human child of almost exactly the same age to serve as the point of comparison, a control. Kellogg had one. His own son, Donald, had been born the previous year. In 1931, Kellogg took a fellowship at a research station in Orange Park, Florida, near a primate colony. And there, earlier than expected, the second participant arrived. A female chimpanzee named Gua, 7.5 months old, on loan from the colony. Donald, at that point, was 10 months old. Two babies, 3 months apart. The experiment could begin. On paper, the rules were simple and strict. Treat them the same. As far as humanly possible, Donald and Gua were dressed the same, fed the same, tested the same, and loved the same. For 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, the Kelloggs observed, measured, and recorded reflexes, blood pressure, memory, fear, strength, obedience, the ability to scribble, to remember, to understand a spoken word. Two parents running a laboratory that never closed on two children who could not know they were being studied. And by the way, stay with this, because the reversal that ended it is not the one you'd guess. At first, the results ran exactly as a headline would want them to. Gua, the chimpanzee, was winning. She was faster, stronger, more coordinated. She learned to walk upright, to eat with a spoon and drink from a glass, to open doors by their handles, to obey spoken commands. And in the early months, she often did these things sooner and better than Donald did. She was more affectionate on cue, quicker to solve simple physical problems, more alert. She recognized the people around her, though in a revealingly chimpanzee way, identifying them by their smell and their clothing, where Donald came to know them by their faces. For a while, if you had walked into that Florida house and watched the two of them, you might have concluded the ape was the more advanced child. But there was one line Gua could not cross, and it was the line that mattered most: language. However human her behavior became, Gua never spoke. She never imitated a single human word. Kellogg had believed that immersion might unlock speech in a chimpanzee. It did not. Her biology set a ceiling, and no amount of nurture could raise it. On the question the whole experiment was built to answer, the ape failed. And so, if the story had ended there, it would be a footnote, a curious study proving the limits of environment. But it did not end there. Because while everyone was watching the chimpanzee to see if she would become more human, no one was watching closely enough in the other direction. Donald was becoming more like Gua. It crept in slowly, the way these things do. The human child, raised as the twin of a chimpanzee, began to imitate his sister. He started to move like her, at times going about on all fours. He picked up her habits. When he wanted something, he increasingly did not reach for words. He grunted. He developed a taste for chewing on things the way she did. And then came the detail that, decades later, still stops people cold. When Donald was around a year and a half old, and the Kelloggs sat him down for a language test to check the vocabulary a toddler his age should be building. Donald could produce only a handful of words. Instead, to ask for food, he had begun to imitate Gua's sound, a short, breathy chimpanzee bark. Sit with the picture for a moment. The scientists had set out to humanize an ape. What they had actually done was begin to teach their son to be an ape. He was not catching up to human speech. He was drifting toward the grunts of his companion. The control subject was contaminating himself. Or rather, the experiment was contaminating him. We do not know the exact moment the Kelloggs understood what they were looking at. What we know is what they did. After 9 months, far sooner than the years-long study Kellogg had once imagined, they ended it, abruptly. Gua was sent back to the primate colony. The matching cribs were separated. The experiment was over. The scientists never stated a single tidy reason for stopping. Historians have offered several, and they are not mutually exclusive. Perhaps 2 people running a 12-hour-a-day laboratory on 2 infants were simply exhausted. Perhaps Gua, growing stronger and harder to manage, had come to seem a danger to the boy. But among the explanations that later scholars keep returning to, one stands out: the possibility that the study ended because of what it was doing to Donald's development, that the parents looked at their son grunting for food and quietly closed the notebook. What happened to the 2 children afterward is where the story turns from strange to genuinely sad. Gua went back to the primate colony she had come from. Taken out of the only family she had ever known, she did not live long. She died of pneumonia the following year, at just 3 years old. Donald returned to the life of a human child. The ape-like habits, the accounts agree, faded. He grew up, and the grunting was left behind with the cribs. In 1933, his parents published their findings in a book, The Ape and the Child, a serious work of comparative psychology, still cited today, in which their own son appears not as a boy but as a subject, cataloged and measured page after page. The scientific conclusion was clear and, in its way, reassuring. Environment can carry an ape a remarkably long way, but it cannot rewrite biology. Heredity has limits that nurture cannot cross. The experiment had answered its question, and there the public story usually stops. But there is one more line in the record, and it is the quietest and heaviest of all. Donald Kellogg died in 1973. He took his own life. He was 43 years old. It is important to be careful here. No source establishes any link between that death, 4 decades later, and the 9 months he spent as an infant beside a chimpanzee. It would be false and unfair to draw a straight line between them. People are not experiments, and a life is not a data point. But the fact sits at the end of this story regardless, and it casts its shadow backward over everything. Over the matching cribs, and the stopwatch, and the careful notes, and the 2 parents who turned their own child into a control group and, by their own later admission, came to regret it. The ape and the child is remembered as a landmark in psychology, and it is one. But it is also something that textbooks tend not to say out loud. It is the story of an experiment that succeeded at proving its point and failed at something harder to measure. The simple recognition that one of its subjects was not a subject at all. He was a little boy. And for 9 months, in a quiet house in Florida, the people who were supposed to see that saw a data set instead. If they buried this, what else did they bury?